When did it hit you that your parents viewed you as a commodity instead of their child? For me, the truth crashed down when I was 21, and my father confined me to our basement for rejecting a marriage proposal to his 48-year-old business associate. That day is etched in my memory. I just wrapped up my third year of college and come home for summer break. My father had been acting strange, constantly mentioning a golden opportunity that would elevate our family status. I assumed he was talking about a business venture. I was wrong. I was the deal. That evening, Raphael joined us for dinner. I'd crossed paths with him at my father's company gatherings before, and he always gave off an unsettling vibe, staring too long when he thought no one noticed. I never grasped why my father insisted I attend those events until that night, mid-dinner. He started praising Raphael, saying how much he admired me, how he'd be a great provider, and how fortunate I was to catch the eye of such a successful man. My stomach churned. Raphael sat there with a smug grin, acting like this was perfectly normal. Then my father pulled out a small box, announcing that Raphael had proposed, and he'd given his approval. At first, I thought it was a cruel prank. I glanced at my mother, who kept her eyes fixed on her plate. My brother, Hayden, avoided my gaze. I laughed nervously and told them all to get lost. That's when my father's demeanor shifted. I'd seen him upset before, but never like this. He declared I had no say in the matter, that Raphael was offering $2 million to unite our family businesses through marriage. I stood, insisting I wasn't for sale, and tried to leave, but Raphael grabbed my arm, saying he'd waited long enough and that my father had promised me to him. Panicking, I snatched a wine glass and smashed it against his face. Chaos erupted. My father went ballistic, yelling that I destroyed everything, calling me an ungrateful wretch who couldn't appreciate his sacrifices. Raphael, bloodied, muttered about breaking me in, while my mother sobbed in the corner. I tried to flee, but my father seized me, dragged me to the basement, a finished space with a bathroom but no windows, once a rec room before he turned into storage for his collectibles. He shoved me inside, saying I'd stay there until I was ready to apologize and fulfill my duty to the family. The lock clicked, and I screamed until my voice gave out. No one came. I pounded on the door for hours, pleading to be released. My phone was upstairs, leaving me no way to call for help. I kept thinking, this can't be happening. They can't keep me here. Someone will see how insane this is. But no one came. I could hear footsteps above, and the next morning, Raphael's voice carried on as if nothing was wrong, as if I wasn't trapped below. That evening, my mother slid food under the door. I begged her to free me, but she whispered that I needed to comply, that my father had staked everything on this deal, and our family would collapse if I refused. When I asked how she could let this happen to her daughter, she said women sometimes have to sacrifice for the family's sake, then walked away. By day 2, panic set in. I kept hearing Raphael upstairs, negotiating with my father as if I'd already consented. They were hashing out details like it was a done deal. I realized they wouldn't release me until I gave in. That night, my father slid a marriage contract under the door, telling me to review it and that I'd sign it tomorrow, like it or not. He called Raphael generous for tolerating my outburst. Then he said, "You're worth $2 million to this family, and you won't ruin this." Sitting in that dim basement, it hit me. I wasn't a daughter to him, just a bargaining chip, a piece of property to trade. Hayden was the one who freed me after 48 hours. He looked shaken, saying he couldn't bear hearing me cry anymore. He told me our father and Raphael were at the bank, setting up accounts for the business merger, and urged me to run, promising to give me a head start before alerting them. But upstairs, I saw the marriage contract on the dining table, my signature forged by my father. Something shattered inside me. I knew fighting back would only land me locked up again, maybe somewhere worse. So when they returned, I played broken, apologized to Raphael, and said I'd been overwhelmed but now understood. My father's relief was nauseating. Raphael looked triumphant, like he'd won a prize. My mother hugged me, whispering, "Thank you," as if I'd saved her. Only Hayden seemed horrified by it all. The wedding was scheduled 3 months out, giving me time to plan. Update *, those 3 months were the longest of my life. Every morning, I woke up suffocating, trapped in a house with people who saw me as a transaction. Raphael started visiting almost daily, bringing gifts, always jewelry, extravagant but possessive, like necklaces that felt like chains or bracelets that dug into my skin. He'd watch me with those predatory eyes while I forced gratitude. His touch, his hand lingering on my back, made my skin crawl. He'd talk about our future home, a mansion outside the city where I'd be comfortable while he worked like a bird in a gilded cage. My father treated the arrangement like a deal he'd sealed. When Raphael was around, he'd talk about me like I wasn't there, boasting about my knack for numbers or my ability to host guests, pitching me like a product. One night, I overheard him assure Raphael I'd calm down after the wedding, dismissing my resistance as a temporary flaw. My mother played both sides, sneaking into my room at night with pity in her eyes, saying she knew how hard this was, then showing me wedding magazines in the next breath, gushing about the life Raphael could provide. When I asked how she could support this, she said marriage was about securing a future, not childish notions like love, admitting she'd learned to tolerate my father over time. I realized she'd been bartered too, maybe not as brutally, but still traded. Hayden was the only one who saw the madness of it all. During dinners, when Raphael made vile comment about molding me into the perfect wife, Hayden's glances screamed disgust. We started having hushed talks when no one was around. At 19, still relying on our parents, he was terrified of our father, but wanted to help. I knew I had to escape before the wedding, but it wasn't as simple as running. My father had frozen my accounts, claiming it was to protect my future, and taken my passport and ID for safekeeping during marriage license preparations. Raphael's hired wedding planner shadowed me, reporting my every move. I couldn't go anywhere alone. My mother or the planner was always there. I started small, telling Raphael I wanted to prove I could be a dutiful wife, asking to assist with his business paperwork. He ate it up, thinking I was coming around. I used it to learn his contacts, his schedule, his moments of unavailability. I faked excitement about the wedding, bringing up details to distract my father into taking business calls, giving me chances to rummage through his office. That's when I discovered his company was crumbling, drowning in debt. For years, it had been this way. Raphael's merger wasn't merely about injecting funds. It was a lifeline to save my father from total financial ruin. That's why he was so frantic, why he was ready to trade his daughter's future. The $2 million wasn't just a windfall. It was a matter of survival. The hardest part was shopping for the wedding dress. Standing in those ivory gowns of my mother, and the planner wept over how stunning I appeared. All I could think about was how I was being adorned for my own burial. Raphael demanded pictures of every dress, texting his critiques as if he had any claim over me. The neckline needs to be deeper. Show more skin. My mother would nod, requesting changes without question. Each night, I'd lock my bedroom door, shove furniture against it, and sob quietly into my pillow. Invitations were mailed. People began calling with congratulations. Old high school friends texted, gushing about my luck in marrying such a rich man. No one mentioned the age difference. No one asked if I was okay with it. They only saw the wealth. Hayden was the one who helped me reclaim my ID. He staged a massive argument with my father to distract him while I slipped into his office and cracked open a safe. I didn't get my passport, but I secured my driver's license. I started stashing small amounts of cash. This my mother wouldn't notice missing from her purse, and sold jewelry Raphael had gifted me at pawn shops 2 towns away during supposed dress fittings. Things worsened when Raphael decided he needed to groom me for married life. He began hosting private dinners, quizzing me on his tastes, dictating how he wanted his household managed, and outlining his expectations for a wife. He declared I wouldn't return to college after the wedding, claiming educated women were unfit mothers and that he expected children within a year. He sat too close, his hand grazing my thigh under the table, ignoring my recoils. One evening, he tried to kiss me, pinning me against the wall when I turned away. He said I needed to get comfortable with it, that we do far more than kiss after the wedding. I forced myself to stay still, not to resist, knowing I couldn't let him tell my father I was defiant. I stood there, his vile, damp lips on my neck, his hands clutching my waist too tightly. 2 weeks before the wedding, I learned they'd already planned my life, where I'd live, what I'd wear, even what I'd eat. I overheard Raphael telling my father he didn't want me gaining weight after the marriage, that his housekeeper would oversee my diet. They spoke of me like I was a prize pet needing to maintain its look. That's when Hayden lost it. We were in his room, me recounting what I'd heard, and he stood abruptly, saying, "Enough. We're getting you out of this." He had some college savings he'd give me, not a lot, but enough to escape, to hide where Raphael and my father couldn't find me. We devised a plan in hushed tones late at night. Hayden would cause a scene the day before the wedding, big enough to keep everyone distracted while I slipped away. I'd take a bus to the city, then another across state lines to a university friend who'd let me stay without prying. It wasn't foolproof, but it was a start. What we didn't anticipate was my mother finding the bus ticket. She rarely cleaned my room, but she did that day and found it hidden in a book. I returned from another awful lunch with Raphael to see her on my bed, ticket in hand, face pale. I braced for her to tell my father. Instead, she looked at me, tears welling, and asked, "Do you despise him that much?" Not my father, Raphael, as if the only reason I'd resist was hatred for a man old enough to be my father, who treated me like an object to control. I couldn't hold back anymore. I told her I loathed him, his gaze, his touch, his words about me. I despised that my father had sold me, that she had allowed it. Tears came, all the fear, revulsion, and anger spilling out. I said I couldn't breathe near him, couldn't sleep knowing what awaited me after the wedding. For a moment, I thought she got it. She hugged me, smoothed my hair like when I was a child, whispered apologies, then said, "But you learned to cope." That shattered something in me. I realized she wouldn't help. To her, this was just how life worked. Women were bartered, used, controlled. They adapted. They endured by surrendering. She didn't tell my father about the ticket, but she began watching me constantly, never leaving me alone with Hayden, instructing the planner to check my bags whenever we left. My escape plan was gone. The night before the rehearsal dinner, Raphael arrived with more papers, additional contracts, business deals with my father. I overheard them in the study, Raphael insisting everything be finalized before the ceremony, my father sounding relieved, almost thankful. I stood outside, listening to them negotiate the terms of my sale, Raphael promising the first $1 million upon signing the marriage certificate, the second after I proved myself a dutiful wife for 6 months. They had written standard for this: obedience, availability, appearance, fertility. I returned to my room and vomited, collapsing on the bathroom floor, trembling, knowing time and options were running out. In less than 48 hours, I'd be legally tied to this man, taken to his home where no one would hear me scream, where I'd be utterly trapped. That night, I formed a desperate new plan. If I couldn't escape, I'd make Raphael reject me, deem me unworthy of his investment. The rehearsal dinner was at a lavish restaurant Raphael had reserved entirely. His business associates, my father's colleagues, and extended family were there, looking at me with envy or pity. I sat beside Raphael at the head table, his hand constantly on my knee under the tablecloth, tightening whenever I shifted away. I waited until everyone was present, all eyes on us. Raphael stood to give a toast, speaking of his excitement to bring me into his life, thanking my father for entrusting him with his most precious asset. That's when I rose, scanned the faces, and said in a steady voice, "I need everyone to know I'm being forced into this marriage." My father locked me in the basement for 2 days when I rejected Raphael's proposal. He forged my signature on the marriage contract. Raphael is paying him $2 million to marry me against my will. The room fell silent. Raphael's face contorted with rage. My father half stood, fury reddening his face, but I continued, detailing everything. Raphael's talk of training me, the criteria for being a good wife, how they'd taken my documents, control my movements, plan my future without my input. I ended by looking at Raphael's business partners and saying, "Is this the kind of man you want to do business with? Someone who buys a wife and imprisons women who refuse him." My father reached me in seconds, gripping my arm so hard it bruised, hissing for me to be quiet. Raphael tried to laugh it off, claiming I was just nervous about the wedding, but I saw the shock and unease on people's faces. Some women looked sick. One of Raphael's older colleagues stared at him with clear disgust. My father dragged me from the restaurant, nearly throwing me into the car. The drive home was filled with a terrifying silence worse than any shouting. My mother sobbed. Hayden looked both proud and terrified. At home, my father grabbed my hair, pulling me toward the basement, screaming that I'd ruined everything, destroyed our family, called me an ungrateful traitor who'd rather demolish her family than fulfill her role. Hayden tackled him to stop him. They fought as I fled to my room, locking the door. I heard furniture breaking, my mother pleading for them to stop. I sat against the door, heart pounding, unsure if my plan had worked or if I'd made everything worse. I couldn't take back what I'd said. My phone buzzed with texts from Raphael, threats calling me a liar, vowing I'd regret humiliating him, that he'd ensure I had nothing and no one left. Then my father began pounding on my door, that was cracking under his weight, screaming he'd kill me before letting me destroy his work. Later, I stayed barricaded in my room, hearing my father rage downstairs, smashing things, yelling about disloyal children and family duty. My phone kept buzzing with Raphael's threats and bizarre offers to forgive me if I publicly apologized, as if I were the one at fault. The police came, but my father convinced them it was just wedding stress. They didn't speak to me, just believed him and left, assuming nothing serious could happen in a nice house. Hayden slept outside my door, vowing to protect me. I heard my mother crying, my father alternating between threatening and begging her to fix the mess. Morning brought an eerie quiet. Hunger and the need for a bathroom forced me out. Hayden, bleary-eyed but resolute, walked with me downstairs, staying between me and any danger. The house was a wreck. Broken glass, overturned furniture, pictures off walls, but my parents were gone. Hayden said they'd left at 5 a.m. I trembled, barely able to hold my phone, and called my mother and father, getting no answer. I texted a cousin in the wedding party, who replied instantly. The wedding was still on. My parents were telling everyone I'd had a breakdown but would be fine for the ceremony, painting me as unstable rather than sold. I felt faint. Hayden made me sit, brought water, promised we'd find a way, but I saw his fear. We were just kids, me 21, him 19, against my father's resolve. Then Raphael called. I answered, needing to know his plan. He said he'd spoken with my father, that they'd reached an agreement about my outburst. He'd proceed with the wedding. Understanding women get emotional. Then his tone hardened, warning that if I didn't show up tomorrow, apologetic and ready to be a good wife, he'd ensure my father lost everything, Hayden's college fund included, and ruin our family with influence. I spent hours in a panic, trapped. I couldn't run, no money, nowhere to go, and Raphael was watching. I couldn't stay. My father would drag me to the altar. When my parents returned, my father was no longer raging but cold, calculated. My mother avoided my gaze. They sat us in the wrecked living room, and my father laid out the new terms. The wedding would go forward. Raphael would overlook my outburst if I publicly claimed I was stressed and didn't mean my words, apologized to his associates, and became a model wife. In return, he'd pay the $2 million, saving our business. If I refused, he'd withdraw his offer, ensure the business failed, block future loans, and ruin Hayden's job prospects. My father presented this like a business deal, not the sale of my life. I looked to my mother, pleading silently, but she stared at the floor, whispering that sacrifices were necessary for family, that I'd adapt in time. IT was in that moment. I fully grasped the truth. There was no way out, no rescue on the horizon. No one would fight for me except Hayden, who was just as ensnared as I was, and something within me shifted, not shattering, but solidifying. I understood that to endure this, I had to stop waiting for salvation and start strategizing differently. I told my father I needed time to reflect. He eyed me with suspicion, but granted me until dawn to see reason. He cautioned me against fleeing again, revealing that Raphael had hired watchers to guard the house, ensuring his asset stayed put. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring blankly at the wall for hours, imagining a future owned by Raphael, raise his children, my spirit withering as everyone acted like it was ordinary. I refused to accept it. I wouldn't live that life. But I couldn't find a path to freedom that wouldn't devastate everyone I loved. Around midnight, Hayden slipped into my room and sat beside me. We were silent for a long stretch. Then he asked if I recalled our childhood games, plotting escapes from zombie outbreaks or alien attacks, vowing we'd always have each other's backs. Tears came as I admitted I couldn't bear to see this happen to me. He said he'd rather lose his own future than watch me be sacrificed. That's when the plan sparked. I told Hayden we needed something to force Raphael to retreat without ruining our family entirely. If this was a transaction to them, we had to make it a losing deal. We spent the night combing through every resource we could access: my father's business documents, old emails, financial records Hayden could pull from the family computer, searching for anything to use against Raphael. We uncovered plenty about my father's money troubles, but nothing to leverage against Raphael. Morning arrived too soon. I heard my parents stirring downstairs, my mother calling up that it was time to prepare. The wedding planner was due shortly to dress me, style my hair, and ensure I looked flawless for my transaction. Then Hayden found it, an old email chain hidden deep in my father's archives. Correspondence between him and Raphael, stretching back 3 years, scheming about my marriage since I was 18. They discussed how to groom me for the idea, Raphael admitting he'd been fixated on me since I was 16, spotted at my father's company picnic. My father replied with ways to optimize the deal, never once considered my desires, only calculating the best moment to profit. Reading it made my stomach churn. Raphael had been watching me, plotting, since I was still a minor, with my father's collusion. I took screenshots of everything, sent them to my email, Hayden's email, and a new account for safekeeping. I went downstairs, told my parents I needed to speak with Raphael before the ceremony, to make amends privately. My father, relieved, assumed I'd surrendered and called Raphael to set up. Raphael arrived, exuding arrogance, certain of his victory. My father left us alone in the study, a final gesture before handing me over. The moment the door shut, Raphael's mask fell. He threatened to make me pay for every moment of humiliation I'd caused, promising I'd learn the consequences of defying him once we were wed. I stayed calm, showed him the emails, and watched his expression shift as he realized what I held. I told him if he didn't abandon the wedding and cut ties with our family entirely, those emails would go to every business contact he had, to the media, to anyone curious about a scheme to acquire a teenage girl through her father. It might not be illegal since nothing happened while I was underage, but it would ruin his reputation. No one would work with him again. He lunged for my phone. I stepped back, informing the files were already backed up in multiple places, and Hayden had copies with instructions if anything happened to me. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. I demanded he cancel the wedding, void any contracts with my father, and walk away for good. He tried to argue, to intimidate, but I kept my finger poised over the send button, ready to email his entire contact list. Finally, he caved, agreeing to everything. I watched him leave, barely believing it had worked. Moments later, my father stormed in, pale with shock. Raphael had told him it was over. No merger, no money, no wedding. He erupted, yelling that I'd ruin our family, demanding to know what I'd done to make Raphael back out. I just stared at him. This man who'd raised me, taught me to ride a bike, helped with my homework, then tried to sell me my property, and felt only pity. I told him I knew about the emails, that he'd been planning this for years. I saw the shock in his eyes, then the scheming as he tried to figure out how to twist it, to justify it. I cut him off before he could start. I told him he had a choice. Let me return to university, to my own life, or I'd send those emails to everyone, destroying his reputation as he nearly destroyed my life. My mother stood in the doorway, crying, Hayden lingering behind her. My father looked at them, then back at me, asking why I was doing this to him, as if he were the victim. That's when my mother finally spoke. She told him it was enough. She'd stood by as he squandered their future, made terrible business choices, and tried to fix his mistakes by selling their daughter. But she wouldn't let him blame me for his failures. The next few hours were a haze. Calls canceling the wedding. Guests told of family emergency. Raphael's belongings removed from our house. My father locked himself in his study, refusing to speak. My mother moved through the house, silent, caught between relief and fear of what came next. That night, I packed my bags. I couldn't stay. Hayden helped me load my car, made me promise to call when I reached my friend's place, and hugged me tightly. My mother stood in the driveway, tears streaming, apologizing, saying she should have protected me, admitting her weakness. I couldn't forgive her yet, but said, maybe one day. My father never came out to say goodbye. I saw him watching from his study window as I drove away, unsure if he felt anger, shame, or was already plotting his next move. I didn't care anymore. 6 months had passed. I'm back at university, finishing my degree. My father's company collapsed, partly because Raphael ensured its downfall, his final act of spite. My parents sold the house, moving to something smaller. My mother calls occasionally, trying to mend things. My father never does. Hayden moved in with me, transferring to a nearby college, unable to stay in that house after everything. I still keep the screenshots, just in case Raphael tries anything. But mostly, I focus on building a life that's mine alone.